The smell is what lingers even now, when the faces have blurred into a gray smear. Not the gunpowder, not the blood. It was the smell of wet earth mixed with high-octane fuel, a sharp, chemical sting that coated the back of the throat like cheap schnapps. Or perhaps it was the smell of unwashed wool. I can't be certain. The memory plays tricks, shuffling the sensory deck like a crooked gambler. But I remember the cold. It was the kind of damp, pre-dawn chill that didn't just sit on the skin, but arrested the bones, holding them in custody until the sun finally broke the horizon. I was sitting on the wing of my BF 109, or maybe I was leaning against the wheel strut. It was 1944. September. The leaves hadn't turned yet, I don't think. But the mud was already there, thick and clinging, the way guilt sticks to a suspect's shoes. The airfield was a hive of muted activity. The ground crews moving in the dark like shadows in an alleyway. I heard the metallic of a wrench against an engine block, a sound echoing like a bolt being thrown on a cell door. I looked down at my left hand. The glove was leather, standard issue, worn smooth at the knuckles. But there on the index finger, the seam had split, just a fraction of an inch. A loose thread dangled, pale against the dark hide. I pulled at it. It held fast. I pulled again, harder, feeling the resistance. It was a small thing, a misdemeanor in the grand scheme of the war, but it agitated me. It was a flaw, a crack in the uniform. In my previous life back in Dresden, a loose thread on a uniform was a sign of negligence. It suggested a man who didn't check his equipment, a man who might miss a detail at a crime scene. Richter. I didn't look up immediately. I was still picking at the thread, trying to tuck it back inside, to hide the evidence of decay. Richter briefing. 5 minutes. I nodded to the mechanic. I think his name was Muller. Or Schmidt. He had grease under his fingernails, permanent black crescents. He looked at the plane the way a beat cop looks at a broken storefront window, tired, resigned, knowing he has to clean up the mess. I slid off the wing, my boots sinking into the turf. The briefing room was a hastily erected wooden shack near the tree line. Inside, the air was thick with cigarette smoke and the nervous energy of men waiting for sentencing. Oberleutnant Mayer stood at the front, a map of the sector pinned behind him. It looked like an evidence board, red strings and markers tracking the movement of the perpetrators. Mayer was talking about final victory and protecting the fatherland. I watched him closely. In the police force, you learn to watch the hands, not the eyes. Eyes can be trained to lie. Hands are honest. Mayer's left hand was gripping the edge of the table so hard, his knuckles were white. He was terrified. He was reciting a script, a false statement given under duress. He didn't believe the alibi he was constructing for us. I scanned the room, cataloging the faces. It was a habit I couldn't break. Assessing threats, identifying the weak links. My eyes landed on the new boy in the corner. He couldn't have been more than 19. His flight suit looked too big, bunching at the shoulders. He was staring at his boots, his hands trembling in his lap. Not a subtle shake, but a violent, rhythmic tremor. I knew that look. I'd seen it on the faces of kids we'd pull in for petty theft, sitting in the station interrogation room, waiting for their fathers to come collect them. It was the realization that the game had gone too far, that the consequences were no longer theoretical. He wasn't a soldier. He was a civilian in a costume, a liability. In a high-speed pursuit, you don't want a partner who hesitates. You don't want a partner who is already mourning his own death. I wanted to walk over to him, to shake him, to tell him to straighten his tie and stop fidgeting. I wanted to say, but I stayed seated. The thread on my glove teased my fingertip. Dismissed, Mayer said, the word sounding like a gavel strike. But before we could stand, the siren cut through the room. It wasn't a sound. It was a physical blow. The scramble alarm. It shrieked with a mechanical hysteria that set my teeth on edge. The room exploded into motion. Chairs scraped against the floorboards, a chaotic riot of noise. I surged toward the door, the policeman in me taking over. As I hit the doorframe, I collided with someone. It was the boy, the rookie. For a split second, the chaos froze. He looked up at me, his eyes wide, the pupils dilated. There was no patriotism there, no hatred for the enemy, just a raw animal pleading. He looked like a victim looking at an officer, begging for protection that I knew I couldn't provide. He wasn't seeing a comrade. He was seeing the machinery of the state, and he was realizing he was just fuel for the engine. "Move," I barked, shoving him aside. I ran into the cold morning, the mud sucking at my boots, leaving the citizen behind, stepping into the jurisdiction of the sky, where the only law was gravity. Tub, don't look at the whole crowd. Pick one face. Pick one instigator. Steady, thump, thump, thump. Clang, shred, thud. Kerfuist Luftwaffe thump. Muddy subject deceased. Cause of death. Thermal trauma. White 7 Dresden. Oberleutnant Luftwaffe auf Bangkok focus. Could observe. There is the market square. There is the tram stop. There is the park where I used to smoke a cigarette before my shift. Luftwaffe sputter. Cough. The engine died. The propeller windmilled, slowing down. The blades becoming visible as individual distinct shapes until they stopped completely. It locked into a cruciform shape against the gray sky. Silent, a deafening, absolute silence washed over the cockpit. The vibration in the stick vanished. The roar in my ears ceased. The only sound was the high, thin whistle of the wind rushing over the plexiglass canopy. I was a ghost in a glider now, a 40-ton piece of metal drifting on the currents of heat rising from my burning home. I didn't try to restart it. There was no point. The tanks were dry. I gripped the stick, not with fear but with a strange, heavy resignation. I looked down at the ruins of my street, rising up to meet me. I was drifting down toward the smoke, toward the apartment with the black eyes, toward the silence. I had spent my life looking for clues. Now I was just another piece of evidence waiting to be found. This memory is a shard of glass I carry. Help me pull it out. Subscribe to keep this history alive.